Good evening. Thank you for coming. And we've come here to celebrate the publication of this wonderful book. Copies are available. I think Paola might have to explain how to do that. No, I think it's a code you have to scan, and anyway, there is a way to purchase these books for a discount. So it's a lovely book. So thank you very much for agreeing to come and talk about it. And so tonight we're going to, Paolo and Maddalena are going to do a short presentation of some of the work, which the book's kind of 10 years or more of work of the CODESIGNLAB, which they run together. So there's a really lovely bunch of projects and also some great commentary about some of the work. And then afterwards we're going to have a little sort of panel discussion, questions. So we've got some very nice guests with us this evening who are members of staff. We have Alice Odeke, who's a lecturer, and she is our Equity, Diversity and Inclusion lead. So thank you for being with us tonight. Urna, who's on her way, she's a little bit late. She teaches across the school and is our pastoral nomad architectural specialist. She doesn't know I've described her as that. We have Ripin, Kalra, who's a senior research fellow based here at the Max Lock Centre, and he gave a great talk in this series a few years ago. And then we have Giulio Verdini, who is reader in urban planning and director of global engagement. So we've got some good people to sort of respond to and talk about the work. And then it'd be nice to have some questions, obviously, from the rest of the audience. So so thanks very much for agreeing to do this. And yeah, congratulations on you both. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Thanks all the guests for accepting the invitation. Before starting, I would like to say something about the story of this book. This book has a long story. It's almost 15 years of applied research and experimentation in sub-Saharan Africa. This book was co-edited with Maddalena Laddaga, which is my partner in many adventures. And Maddalena is a design tutor at Oxford Books. She is also completing a PhD at the Milan Polytechnic on off-grid communities. Thank you for your support. And Maddalena was also co-directing the African Faber School throughout these years. And she was participating with me with this project also at the Venice Biennale. So thanks, Maddalena. And again, for me, it's a pleasure to present this work and to share it with you. It's more like an opportunity to have a conversation with students and colleagues and people from outside the school as well. The book is available online. It's published by Actar, which is based in Barcelona and New York. Unfortunately, we cannot sell it directly, so I'm going to show you later on how to eventually buy the book within a sort of discount using a QR code. African Fibers is not a humanitarian project. African Fibers is a project which was developed with a huge community of students and NGOs, local associations, artisans, and sometimes academic institutions. African Fibers is an academic project, an independent project of urban ecologies and ecological construction. The book is explaining the story and is explaining the agenda, the research agenda, which is behind these over 10 years of experimentation. And the book is explaining this, selecting a paradigmatic project that we've been developed over the years in different places with people from different backgrounds. African students from different countries, European students, and again, in different contexts, rural, urban, different climatic scenarios as well. The book is also not just condensing all these built experiments, but also a series of investigation on vernacular architecture in sub-Saharan Africa, how these are an interesting opportunity to learn from spontaneous architecture and informal architecture, how to extrapolate some interesting notions on sustainable construction, community-oriented design process, how to learn from this in alternative pedagogy, how to use the street as a school, and how at the same time use data to inform the agenda of this school. So it's a high-tech experience and a low-tech experience at the same time, based on investigation on the effects of climate change in different climatic regions in Africa, correlation between climate change and different economic and social aspects, migration, issues related to local manufacturing, and issues related to local industries, and how to transform material on site. So how to connect, how to bridge local indigenous technologies and digital technologies in different ways. So for many years, we've been in parallel, while we were working on this African Fabric project, we were collecting information. We were mapping schools of architecture in Africa, different agendas, different stories. Some of them funded by the Baha'i, some of them funded by very colonial approaches, sometimes a real failure, sometimes really interesting experiences to learn from. We were mapping fabrication laboratories in Africa, and we discovered that the first fabrication laboratory in the world was at the MIT in Boston, but the second one was in Sekondi in Ghana. So there is some very interesting familiarities on the way of using manufacturing and interacting with digital cultures in different ways as open source systems that could actually also reinvent the social role of technology in our agenda, in our European agenda. So it's more a process of unlearning and a process of observing and mapping than a process of just sharing what we already know from our experience. And so it's a matter of developing a cultural shift, seeing the world from upside down, like Al-Idrisi map, seeing Africa and Europe, especially from another perspective. So this is my journey. It's my personal journey. I grew up in Africa. I'm originally Italian. It's my students' journey. I've been working with my African students for a long time. I used to teach in Paris at the École Spéciale, where I would say half of my students were African, not from the diaspora, just African. They would just start to learn how to use this, let's say, Western approach for their own context. And the book is somehow has a sort of transversal conversation, which was informing all of these sessions. People from different backgrounds, some of them from the academia, some of them from the practice, some of them African, some of them not African, but very somehow with a very interesting, let's say, way of observing spontaneous architecture. Just to mention a few of them, Christian Benimana is from Rwanda, studied in China at the Tonji University and teaching in Harvard and founding the African Design Center in Kigali. Sheikh Diallo, a maker, a designer, originally from Bamako, Mali, studied in France, and then moved back to Mali. We're just not doing the designer. I was doing like the entrepreneur, like developing his own factory with his own artisan and with his own way of, let's say, working on local industry. Some others, Abdulmalik Simon, Black Urbanism, not really African, a very interesting story. So different backgrounds, different disciplines. Ron Eglash, ethno-mathematicians, teaching at the University of Michigan, working on physical computing, working on reconstructing African fractals, unplanned settlements, implicit algorithms. So the book is somehow, and the project was informed by this conversation, interviews that we made with our students. We learned from them how to also develop the briefs of our sessions sometimes, or let's say our research strategy. So again, the African Fibers has manufacturing as a driver, transforming material, developing a sort of, let's say, hybrid way to connect different cultures and different approaches. Connecting, interfering with technologies, transforming technologies, creating new knowledge. So these projects were actually going in different directions, and this is probably the map which is somehow explaining, summarizing the logic that we were trying to follow. Of course, I'm an architect, I'm a designer, I'm an environmental designer. So climatic map were part of my agenda. We're starting to develop this connection between climatic regions, material available on site, indigenous technologies, and genotypes at different scales, structural genotypes. We're interfering with public space in different way with different strategies. Ways to collaborate with students as drivers. Most of these projects were proposed by students, and this is why I wanted to have a conversation with you, so how we could actually potentially share this kind of pedagogical opportunity. Working with local communities as a way to listen their needs, their requirements, their ideas, sometimes non-linear, sometimes controversial, but always somehow very, very stimulating. So I will try to be very, very quick. Most of these projects were somehow starting from, let's say, an idea of speculating on constraints. Again, evolving what is already existing, working with emergent dynamics, dynamics that are informed by climatic conditions that are somehow affecting also let's say, the materiality and the tectonic of the different projects. This is a project we developed with an Aga Khan Award architect, half Italian and half Malian, I would say. It was Fabrizio Carola was collaborating with Assam Fatih for a long time, mainly evolving tools, compass, grandfathers of robotic arms, very affordable, potentially very powerful, not just one project. I would say that Fabrizio was somehow helping us to understand how to develop families of projects, trying to keep people independent just by developing their own tools. So the compass is somehow a way to, an analogic way to generate families of balls and domes that are somehow responding to some very specific climatic condition. And with this team, we're trying to evolve. So our role was mainly to evolve it, to find a possibility to also test the performance of different tectonics according to very extreme climatic conditions, like in Mali. very hot and dry climate. So we were developing a sort of community sense. It was like made of domes inside domes, clusters. And then we were actually developing an alternative way to also play with robotics and develop this, let's say, comparative approach between, let's say, digital and analog arms, and test it and try to understand how potentially we could develop this in different direction. We were working with UN Habitat for a while, collaborating on a self-sufficient structure for emergency. So using small components to develop, let's say, light and, let's say, fast deployment structures that were actually generating energy for different users in different contexts and different scenarios. Photovoltaic membranes applied to this kind of modular and flexible elements. But we were mainly working on relational space, and we were actually being inspired by this idea of working on construction as a collective practice, a way to share knowledge during the construction side, where people from different ages were actually sharing techniques, technologies, but mainly sharing the way to improve relational space according to specific conditions. This was a project where one of my students in Burkina Faso was actually somehow started collaboration with the village, with the school, and the project was developed between Paris and Ouagadougou, and was mainly related to this idea of working on covered playgrounds where children could potentially use this, but also use Nubian walls as a tectonic was originally somehow generated and developed in this specific climatic region. So transform material on site, physically understand what does it mean to minimize, optimize resources. And I think this is one of the most interesting challenge. How to move, how to collect material in a way that this could be sustainable, how we could learn from. We were talking about embodied carbon, we are talking about minimize greenhouse gas emissions, but the way communities in these places are somehow self-organizing themselves, I think this is something to learn from. And learn from this idea that, again, these structures are in osmosis with the context, with the landscape, like made of earth and somehow connected with the ground in a continuity, somehow in continuity with the landscape, and creating overshadowed space, natural ventilated space. So different climatic contexts, different materials available, different indigenous techniques, different techniques. This is a project in Morocco. Again, proposed by a group of former students, Moroccan former students, on tensile structures, like working on a public space, abandoned public space, and develop a sort of an urban tent for a local association. So how to attach this structure to an existing urban context, how to involve people in different aspects related to this system, which was inspired by the Medina of Saleh. So inspired by this idea of developing urban tent for, again, generate overshadowed and public spaces. So a project that was somehow generating different solution adaptable to different urban conditions, very, let's say, simple but complex structure at the same time, combining people, non-architect, using this as a way to dialogue with local association schools. So there is a sort of social activism that we were developing with the students as well. And see this as factories and local industry. We were developing several fabrication laboratories in this project. One of that was in Marrakesh on 3D printing and the use of local clay, semi-fluid material. We were not just experimenting this, taking inspiration from again, the local vernacular architecture, but we were also self-producing tools, self-producing 3D printers that were transportable and energetically self-sufficient. So sometimes we are just developing devices. And strategically speaking, this has potentially much more disruptive than anything else. This is another laboratory of manufacturing we were developing in Dakar. With a group of artisans. We are actually developing an open-air laboratory with them. Again, the idea was expand their activities, share their activities with the local community. So developing a sort of urban shelter that was somehow covering the existing atelier, but also creating a new space made of this kind of very light structure with a small modular element. The last project I want to show you is the project we were developing for 3 years in Cameroon. This was financed by the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It was a cultural hub. We were starting to somehow study a little bit let's say the construction culture of Cameroon. 5 climatic regions, more than 150 ethnic groups, huge, tremendous heritage in terms of ways of constructing sustainable and informal settlements. And we were starting to develop this in a very strategic way. So the cultural hub started with a small laboratory. A small laboratory will start to map artisans. We were actually inviting students of engineering and architecture from different places around Cameroon, but also Nigeria and Togo and Ghana as well. We were mapping indigenous techniques, we were mapping materials, we were mapping the way people were actually, and we started to develop the first driver, so a very small laboratory of manufacturing, and this was generating families of urban micro infrastructure. So strategically starting with a sort of step-by-step process. And then we found a way to finance a digital manufacturing laboratory at the same time. Cameroon is exporting timber in Europe. It's probably the second country is exporting timber. They are not transforming this material anymore. They're just cutting and selling. So the idea was finding a way to start to develop prototypes that they were actually developing environmental skins on-site, transforming the material on-site, and develop different scale one-to-one prototypes of affordable housing. And then gradually develop the cultural hub as the big project. And this was a 1.5 year adventures where we actually were developing the construction project, the design project and construction site with our students, developing a sort of way to, first of all, refurbish and abandon schools, and then develop an extension with somehow hosting different activities, a library, a fabrication laboratory, an exhibition space. And then this is one of the last things that we are still working on with Maddalena and other people. This was a project which was also financed by the QHT for a while. So there were colleagues from our school that were actually collaborating. UN Habitat and ARUP were actually collaborating with us. It's a sort of idea of somehow working on prefabricated construction system, learning from vernacular architecture, affordable housing, let's say, prototypes that could actually be customized by local communities, connecting, again, vernacular and digital technologies. And then this is what we are discussing now with UN Habitat, a way to continue basically this project in different regions and transform these prototypes according to different users and different communities. So this is let's say the story, and this is the kind of work we've been doing for a long time. I will, before giving the microphone to our guests, I just want to share. Yeah, this is the QR code that you can use to basically to buy the book within a discount. So if you are interested, please scan the QR code. And I would invite our guests to, again, start this conversation. And I will invite also the students and other colleagues to take part as well. I will probably, during this conversation, I'll show also the video that we were presenting at the Venice Biennale, just to also maybe explain the kind of different human dynamics we were dealing with during this project. So please, Jonah. So yeah, maybe Giulio, if you want to start to add the first thoughts, and then we can.
Okay, so. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Paolo, for the brilliant presentation and also for the book that I'm now having in my hands. I didn't expect. Thank you very much. And I mean, it's really a great pleasure to be here in a way, first of all, to understand always that what is happening in this school is quite remarkable. And then we work very often separately, in a way, because I mean, I'm more belonging to the planning area, and this is more architecture. So we are in different corridors, in different floors, but at the other hand, we are doing things that are, from different disciplinary perspectives, very similar in a way, and the book, in a way, is somehow showing that. So it's fascinating to see what you have produced and what you have sort of put together, all these like long experience, 15 years of experience of practicing and working in the context of Africa and understanding how really people are reinventing ways to somehow leveraging their own cultural understanding, practices, traditional knowledge system, as you said, and so on, and then merging that with the innovation that is happening and is spreading across continents and places, and finding different ways to do things. I think that's absolutely very interesting to me. This morning, just to show how important it is to have this kind of books, really, I was invited to give a keynote talk in a conference online. As I was also teaching, I said, sorry guys, but I'm gonna send you a video. So I think it was projected, this video this morning, so I suppose my talk has been somehow there. I'm not 100% sure, but anyway, and it was about smart cities and the future of smart cities. And I said, okay, let me quote these books, because I think this is something that can give us quite a lot of insights into what is happening today. And the whole idea was that the smart city approach has been for many years now, an idea that with the high tech we would have solved many of the problems of cities in different parts of the world. But then ultimately, the question is that are those smart cities really suitable for the challenges that we are facing, that cities are facing today, yes or not? And my argument in the talk this morning was that not entirely, because most of these smart cities approaches that we have seen everywhere, they've been, and I'm using here a concept from Doreen Massey, aspatial projects, so completely detached from the context. So somehow, jumped on places with the promise that they would have brought modernity, innovation, and so on, and then completely detached from the everyday life of people. And so the argument was that, look, what we are doing in our university from different point of view is that we are trying to reconnect instead, let's say, what is happening in the everyday life, people practices with this. And only by reconnecting this, we can create resilience somehow. We can create places that can sustain in a certain way, and that are not spatial, decontextualized, but instead are deeply contextualized. So I think these examples, and I'll stop here, then I'll give the floor to others, shows really how we can contextualize and therefore how we can create the real sustainable cities that we need. Because that's ultimately, I think, the question. How we can make sure that what we do is relevant, is sustainable, can stay there for many years, and rather than disappearing suddenly because it's not really, how to say, giving an answer to the real problems of people. So on that note, I think it's great to have this kind of contribution, basically, for these reasons.
Thank you. I will just give it first round.
Hello, my name's Alice Odeke, and I'm an architect trained here, but I am of Ugandan origin. And Paolo, I have to say, this book is probably what is actually truly needed when I think about my experiences of being born in Uganda, growing up over there, coming into England and being educated here for my formative time, and then going back to my own country, as I have done frequently over the years, to now look at architecture and how the thing that struck me about it, from what you were telling us as well and your experiences and the images, is how there is always the desire to export something. And as an African, a Ugandan, I find it one of the things that's lacking, which is why projects like this are really quite useful, is to re-engage with the communities, to let them understand that, yes, there is an opportunity to actually look back and use your traditional techniques because they worked. And one of the things that always comes to my mind when I see architecture in Uganda is, say, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There is this drive, I think, to decolonialize, and I think sometimes it's quite important to look at what colonial, not so much colonial, that's probably not the right word to use actually, what traditional methods of construction and fabrication have always brought to the table. They worked. And what I see in my own country, in my capital city, is it's becoming, the seduction of being like the West is traveling at such a pace, and the delivery of it is forgetting the fact that the construction and fabrication styles that we have developed in the West took time. And what we're trying to do in a short time is hundreds of years of development and technology, crash them all together and produce something that looks like what's over there, but we don't understand how it actually works and operates within our own climate, and looking at the impact of that on how we live our home and how our traditional experiences are changing to the point that, architecture is no longer doing what it should and can do. So this is what I was particularly touched about, the fact that, 15 years is a long time. And, I think if we look back into this, we are very able to start thinking, well, okay, let's learn what worked well. How can we now use it, particularly in the climatic changes that we are experiencing? I think the progression should be about our traditional materials, fabrication systems. How can we progress them forward to meet the need and apply, some good design ideas which meet how we have also changed how we live. Traditionally, you had your house with your living room and what have you in Europe, for example. Now we have open plan living. And actually, as Africans, we were the pioneers of open plan living. And you know what? Let's develop our open plan living principles, because that's how we engage with the community, that's how we ensure sustainability, and it's also a good way for progression. Because once you've built your house in, say, Uganda, that looks like the house in, Brixton, then what? Because it works in Brixton, it doesn't work for you. Whereas if you kept with what you knew, you had community engagement, because as far back as I can remember, I mean, it's changed a lot now, in our village where I come from, everybody within that village lived in a compound, pretty much like the huts, the round huts that you were showing. And everybody helped build everybody else's house, and there was a structure to it, and there's a reason why it was successful. We've thrown all that out, and we now have really modern buildings. But our living styles have not progressed with our building style. So I think it's a good opportunity to have a look at how this can be a sustainable thing beyond a study, which I think is what you're focusing on. And I think in my case, here ends the lesson. I finished my preaching. I shall pass it on to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. And thank you, Paolo. That was really interesting to see what you've been researching for all this time, and really, really an interesting perspective that's kind of developed over a long period of time, and really useful to today, especially in urban environments. I think the best way I could kind of relate is kind of looking at my roots in Mongolia and kind of vernacular ways there, which I thought your approach to combining low tech with high tech, and then relating that to local economies and how that kind of worked is really relevant, because developing urban areas in places like Africa or Asia really relate to the economy, and if you have low-tech skills, low-tech kind of traditions which work, having a portion of high-tech which is kind of coming in doesn't destroy the kind of communities that already exist, but also enables them to kind of develop different traditions differently. And I think visiting Mongolia, where I'm from, that was like a big insight for me, seeing how actually they don't experience urban space in the same way, so the economy can never really pay for such high-tech architecture or systems or infrastructure, and relating architecture and construction methodologies to the local economy actually helps them develop, not helps them develop, but kind of continue in quite a progressive and pure way. So that was my most interesting part. I'm going to pass on to...
Yeah. Thank you very much, Urna. And to all the speakers who've given me some very good ideas on what to, on thoughts. But Paolo, first of all, thank you very much. This is an excellent book. I do look forward to reading it from cover to cover, now that I also have a hard copy in my hand. But I think there are a few things I want to mention. First of all, it's been quite rare for good books on vernacular architecture to come along. You get a lot of coffee table books, which are pictures and they show the representation. It's very superficial. Does not go into depth, so it's very, very heartening to see a book with depth come along, which looks at different aspects. I got into the understanding the significance of vernacular architecture when I remember as a student, I was in the Himalayas after an earthquake, and then realized that vernacular played a big role in whether the building survived or not. And it actually just leads me to think that this kind of information about vernacular architecture can help to solve two types of problems. One problem that does not need solving, and another problem that does need solving. So I'll start with a problem that does need solving, is that when we looked at in the research what kind of buildings survived after an earthquake. And earthquakes don't happen every day. Big earthquakes happen sometimes every 70, 80 years. So people tend to forget what it is like to build for a seismic area, and particularly where there's no engineers and architects helping them with buildings. And most of the world does not hire architects and engineers. I'm sorry to say we're in an architecture school, but we have to adopt our approach to help people build without necessarily being able to afford architects and engineers. So these kind of publications are quite important to communicate what to do. Now, the problem that does need solving is that often people forget when they are seeking new materials or contemporary looking buildings made in reinforced concrete, they do not always understand the underlying principles. And when they fully understand that the vernacular has been tested for a long period of time, and there are elements in it which can deal with floods or earthquakes and so on, then those elements need to be promoted a bit more. And that problem of scaling up safe construction is quite dependent on embedding safety principles within the vernacular. Now, I know that this book does not necessarily focus on the humanitarian part, but there is a value of the vernacular in generating safety at a scale, not only in sub-Saharan Africa, but in huge parts of Asia, Latin America, and so on. So that is a problem that does need solving, where vernacular and materials like this can really make a difference. The problem that does not need solving is that there are a lot of people who, I meet a lot of architects and engineers in different places who say, we are trying to develop the perfect building that you can create with all the materials sourced within 50 kilometers or 25 kilometers. So they're trying to push the bar. Let's grow everything on site. But that problem does not need solving if you actually look more closely at the vernacular, because many of those principles are already embedded within it. So it's all about not trying to reinvent the wheel, but about learning what the vernacular has already got to offer in terms of producing buildings and safe buildings from within a small radius around where the building is actually delivered and built. So that problem necessarily is something that we do not need to reinvent. The architects and engineers just need to listen and observe a little bit more and learn from the vernacular before trying to reinvent that concept of localized building materials and so on. I remember I used to work in what was then built, one of the world's first zero carbon development in Masdar. And one of the performance indicators was the building material has to be within a certain radius of the development. And then we realized that a lot of it was pointing towards techniques which have been used extensively in the local area but had now been lost. You cannot find very easily buildings which are made of vernacular techniques in the Abu Dhabi area anymore. So it is something that we need to recognize now and try to preserve. The other thing which my colleague from Uganda actually pointed out, which struck me, a chord with me actually, is behaviors. Vernacular is not just about the shell, it is also about behaviors and what happens inside, how we use the space, the community action that goes into production of buildings. At the university here, about 20, 25 years ago, there was some work done which is still lasting around community engagement with asset management. And that work was based on work done in India, in 3 countries in Africa, and we termed it community asset management, which is because we found that actually communities produce and maintain most of the world's buildings. And that model has got lost a little bit because governments have decided they want to do all the housing. But they should be facilitating communities developing a lot of their housing on their own. As a result, there are very few examples in developed world where people have built their own housing scheme. Maybe their own house to some extent, but not necessarily large sort of apartment buildings and so on, because they are normally delivered by the private sector. But in most parts of the world, even large apartment complexes are delivered with user-owner buildings, their own buildings. So that behavior side of it, on how community action leads to housing, how the use of open spaces, how families live together, also can inform us a lot in terms of the future buildings that we produce. I'll stop here. I don't want to go on and on, but thank you for this book. I think it's fascinating. I look forward to reading it. I'll pass it back.
Thank you all. I would invite also students and colleagues to ask some questions, and maybe I will add some other thoughts later on. So please.
Yeah, thank you, Paola, for the presentation, and thank you for the panel. So yeah, I've got a microphone, so I'll take that.
You keep on talking about how vernacular architecture is so critical in the community, with providing jobs for the community. Do you think this is the pinnacle of community-based projects, and how would you relate that to Liu Jiukun's Pritzker Prize-winning award, which is in Chengdu, if you know about it?
When in some of our occasions, when we meet in the first meeting with the community of the project, so let's take an example, the last one in Douala. So one of the first meeting, we show this project of one mosque in Mali that is completely realized with mud, but every year is rebuilt from the community to keep the mood of the facade of the mosque. And we show the value of also self-construction with the community engagement, no? And in this meeting we say, okay, let's try to do something like this. And in Douala, for example, we start first with our students, but then some of the local community artisan and other people comes to help us. We start to make, for example, micro-infrastructure for the market that was very close, and we give them this kind of micro-infrastructure, then a pavilion. So with this, we make this kind of training session to make micro experiment for the local community. And was very interesting. Some of the people recognize some of the elements of this project from the vernacular, and a lot of people start to be more and more engaged. Okay, the next project I will join you. So the group of people work with us was larger and larger time by time. So I think this could be a value of work with some topic of vernacular, and also try to making stuff and show and realize something that can be recognizable, like something that comes from vernacular. We, as environmental designer, we work a lot with this topic that comes, that can be kept from vernacular examples. So, okay, for example, we were in a monsoon climate. Okay, we say let's try to understand which one were the criteria to solve some issue from the climate context and the climate issue from the vernacular. So we keep some of the point of the vernacular, and was a way to making stuff and keep going and keep working with this topic for us, no? In many of our experience.
I just want to add something, which is, I think it's quite interesting. I didn't mention before, but somehow it's transversal to first of all, this project was starting in a school of architecture like this, and we had a very interesting conversation with a group of African students, which remind me an interview by Pier Paolo Pasolini long time ago in the 70s at the University of Rome. And Pier Paolo Pasolini is an Italian writer and film producer and so on and so forth, was basically asking these students, mainly coming from different African regions, why they were in Rome, what they were expecting. It was like late the 60s, engineers, architects, doctors. And the questions were very diversified, the answers were very diversified. They were very actual, basically. Because they were actually very interested to somehow adapt what they were learning in Europe to their own country, make it more affordable, sustainable, accessible. And when I started this conversation with my students, African students in Paris, they were complaining about this idea of working on synthetic vernacular architecture. They say, look, Paolo, we are here because we want to learn more about high tech. We don't care about our origins. Our families are sending us in Europe just because we want to. I was like a few years ago. But there is, so we need, as educator and researcher, we need to take this in account. We need to we don't have to be romantic. I don't think that vernacular architecture has a romantic aspects to learn from. I think vernacular architecture is a very interesting platform to evolve, to decode and transform, adapt to contemporary needs, potentially also somehow open to local industrialization and manufacturing within a multi-scalar approach. So again, I'm saying this because I learned this from my students. Most of these students, they got back. They were graduated in France, they got back in Mali, they start to develop their own business. And this is something that I would like to ask you as well. Who are we training and where these people will continue their professional pathway? I'm asking this almost every day because the more and more African students, but I would say also from other regions, cultural regions, they are conscious about their cultural heritage. There are interests to expand their own network in their own countries. I'm wondering if our universities are ready to develop, expand the platform. And at the same time, this project for many years was one of the few opportunities for European and African architects and students of architecture to work together. Myself, I found still a problem when students from these schools, which knows the African Fabric Project, ask me if there are opportunities to study in Africa, to learn, make research, not humanitarian project, research, experimentation. So there is a very interesting shift in the mentality of the young generation of people that we need to take in account. So for me, this is a very interesting change of perspective that, again, as educator and researcher, we need to take in account. We need to potentially train our students that there are alternative approach to the practice, different clients, maybe not just like conventional client. Sometimes association of artisans, NGOs, low budget project, but with a lot of interesting opportunities to expand this according to different contexts. So there are some transversal aspects I learned from this, and I learned from my conversation and our conversation with locals and students, both European and African, that I would like also to share today, because again, I think And with Giulio and Ripin and Alice last week, we start this conversation about, you know, how we could develop a platform together with the other colleagues to allow also to teach the history of architecture in an alternative way. There is a huge cultural gap in architectural books that are talking about the history of the schools of architecture in pre-colonial Africa and on unplanned settlements in and informal culture in pre-colonial Africa and construction culture. So, but at the same time, we are all interested. We know that there is something to learn from, but we are still not somehow talking to each other and make it this more rigorous, more collective, more open also to our students. So I'm saying this because maybe this is probably the only purpose of my contribution to this book with Maddalena is to provoke this conversation more than everything else.
No, it did not answer my question. But, do you want me to repeat it? Or?
No. I was just bringing up. Any more questions? Yes.
Thank you very much for your presentation. As an African myself, so I'm from Tunisia, I would say that we always chase the idea of the West from France or Italy or the Western Mediterranean. How much, like, what's the limit between modern, like, how much can we modernize our vernacular ideas that we're not stuck in the past, but we're not also changing it so much that we are still chasing the West? So what's the limit? What's the between, like?
Oh, I'll give you a different perspective, a different voice. I think the way to not always be chasing that, in my mind, and I'm really talking based on my experience and my perception and observation, is about us in Africa. It's about empowerment. We need to engage with what we know, what works well, and look at it so that we're developing at a pace that is meeting our needs rather than, as you said, looking to the sort of the Western hemispheres to come and educate us. We need to begin to see what we have. And what I think is wonderful about, you know, the engagement with the community, the artisans and everybody, when you look at situations where that is successful, it is self-sustaining. And the issue that might be more beneficial is, rather than waiting for someone to come and tell us how to do it, is about being innovative and more entrepreneurial about how can we get the funding to assist us to do what we do well. So, and for me as an educator, as an architect, and I'm in my senior years now, I have aspiration of returning to my home country to continue working in that language, because I have a foundation where I can go and see how things were done, how sustainable the environment was that I grew up in. Notwithstanding the impact of climate change, because that unfortunately is not in our gift to manage, but what we can manage is how we evolve in terms of that impact. And the other thing I wanted to add, it's not so much about us waiting for people to come and tell us what to do. It's about us coming here and hoping that where we are being educated, people are open-minded enough to want to see that we have value. So we stop being done unto. Do you understand? We need to say, okay, as Paola says, we need to have these conversations. I want to be in a studio where I'm learning about all the architecture that's represented here, across sort of all the nations, all the cultures, be it Asia, Africa. I need to know this. And there are techniques that we have that are shared, that are common, and why our cultures differently are successful if you return back to how we to our beginnings. And, I hope that kind of answers your question a little bit. But I don't know if anybody has stuff to add.
I think those were two very good questions, and definitely things that we think about, people who like low-tech, who like vernacular architecture, and you made some really good points, Alice. But I think a lot of it is to do with representation. So high-tech architecture is represented through a lot in culture in the West and shared around the world. So in films and books, and it's represented in a really high way. Like the downfalls of high-tech architecture are never kind of represented in books in the way they should be, right? Because there's lots of issues with the way that it's designed. It doesn't work with local environments. It doesn't work with local communities. It doesn't have good operational energy systems at all. The high-tech systems break down. Clients go bankrupt after they run these buildings. But it's the representation of it was created by the star architect for this amazing client who has a BREEAM 5-star rating, which kind of carry a lot of white lies. But actually, if we started representing vernacular architecture and capturing all its strengths in a way that kind of celebrates it, which you were talking about, and the knowledge that I think people feel like it's very common knowledge, but actually, unless you're around people who can tell you these stories or tell you these experiences, it's hard to gain them in the kind of academic or professional way that it should be represented. For example, in Mongolia, the culture is 2,000 years nomadism, and it's kind of seen as primitive. But actually, an architectural system that has lasted 2,000 years and works today is actually something really valuable. So I think a lot of it should be in kind of recording and celebrating.
Absolutely. Thank you, Anna. So in response to that, I'll just give 2 very quick examples. I think there's definitely a problem of image of the vernacular. My first example is my friend Solomon, who lives in Kenya. He is a trainer, an expert trainer on making cement stabilized earth blocks. He's one of the world's best because he knows his soils very well. He knows what will work, what will not work. And he says, he often, when we are having a conversation, he often says, I get hired in Nepal, I get hired in Haiti, I get hired in Europe, but nobody ever gives me a call from Kenya because they say, what do? You make earth blocks and you're just telling other people to live in mud houses, whereas we want to aspire to something else. And until somebody saw a video of him in the Ministry of Housing on YouTube and saw he was doing these amazing projects all over the world, and then he got a call to come and do something with the Ministry of Housing. So that was, the YouTube came to his rescue because suddenly he was recognized globally. So that's quite interesting. Recently, I don't know if you follow Louis Vuitton, but they launched a new slipper, an innovative Louis Vuitton slipper in India. It was the wrong market to pick because the design was from India. It was what we call the Kolhapuri chappal, and it usually costs about an equivalent of £1 to buy those. Louis Vuitton was selling it for £950 in Indian market, targeting the middle class. And then the director of design was asked, where did you get this? He said he had received inspiration. He came up with some ideas around describing where he got the inspiration from, but it was quite clear, the media was quite clear that it was literally a photocopy of a very common design. So they accepted it, but I say that if it takes Louis Vuitton to put their LV on earth blocks, why not? to raise the profile of it. I'm not promoting that. I'm not promoting Louis Vuitton. It's not an advertisement. But I'm saying that if this is what people are aspiring to, and you can't change that very quickly, it's a behavior issue. It's an issue that we're all being brought up by what is desirable in media and all the rest of it, and peer pressure, anything. So it does take, to some extent, if the quality is good and it does have a promise that it meets aspirations, it does not then matter where the message is coming from. But it was really interesting because that incident with Louis Vuitton suddenly raised the profile of the workers who were producing the Kolhapuri chappal for £2. The conditions they were working in, the amount of money they were getting paid for that, all that came out all of a sudden in a big way in the Indian media. And of course, spread through WhatsApp. And of course, LV had to give out a statement. But I'm saying let's take advantage of this media world we live in and then see how we can use it for the vernacular. So, that's it.
So, now just to respond to the question that was raised about the feeling of being stuck in the past, no? And also then to address the point of what we should do as educators to kind of overcome that. Now, the feeling of being stuck in the past is not something, I would say, new. No, it's been there for forever, I would say. And certainly we've been through that process even in the West a few decades ago. I mean, if you think about the old modernization theories after the Second World War, was about demolishing the historic city center to make space for, big lanes for cars and modernizing cities, to a certain extent. That proved to be a failure, if you like. And then there has been a kind of adjustment and finding ways to, in a way, protect the past, but still living in a very contemporary lifestyle. The cities in Europe are proving that, in a way. So probably this is something that needs to be done in everywhere, is to find the right balance between protecting the past and living a life that is a contemporary life without feeling that this is something detrimental, that this is a limit to our lifestyle. Not at all. Actually, you can get quite a lot of benefit from that sort of way of living that is somehow between the past and let's say, contemporary. I don't use the term modern because of the old connotation attached to the modernization, if you like. So to do that, we need to operate at the level of conceptual dismantling of so many concepts that we are using that are very dangerous in a way. So it's in a way a task that we have to dismantle this, being aware that there are power relationships in it, so that what has been, for instance, done in a place, it's imitated by others, and especially if that center is a powerful one, is considered superior to a certain extent. So to do that, we need to, when we say decolonize in our practices, is about telling that the center is not necessarily, to say, something that is superior or better. It's just, we need to establish that sort of dialogue between different contexts and see what is applicable, what is not applicable, what is transferable, what is not transferable. The other thing that we do as researchers is to find evidence base for what we do. I think this is the task that we have. So we need to prove with data, with evidence, that what is, let's say, out there is either positive or negative. Let's put it this way. Now, back to vernacular, let's say, construction techniques and all of that, we need always to ask the question, if that's something that is working, is it something that is suitable for contemporary lifestyle or not? And I think you mentioned that. And here we need to be very critical. Something might not work anymore, and we need to get rid of it. Maybe not canceling, but still innovating, trying to be brave enough to innovate that. And especially today, with the climate emergency, we have seen that many, many things that we were taking for granted are questioned. When we were talking, on one hand, it's true that we need to learn from the past because it's still, it has been resilient for a long time. But in some cases, for instance, I was last year in this visit was to me very enlightening. In the middle of the desert in Algeria, there is a school of earth and architecture where they are trying to really to bring back all this knowledge about how to construct with traditional techniques and all of that. It's fantastic, amazing. Lots of investment in upskilling people and so on, schools and all of that. Suddenly, we are discovering that for the first time in history, there are heavy rains in the desert. Now, how you deal with that when, I mean, it's a simple thing, you know, but it sort of pushes us to think that possibly we need also to rethink vernacular architecture and construction techniques because we need to face conditions that are new to us. And so that means that the past is an extremely rich source of inspiration for us. The past proved that we can live together with that, fine, but we need to be also brave enough to move on somehow. And that's something that we can do in our universities. And that's what education should do at different levels in different disciplinary fields.
Thank you very much. Have you got another question? Yes.
Hi. My issue is the architecture, the vernacular architecture is actually brilliant. I like that. But what about the material? The materials that you used? I see a lot of wood. That means trees must have been cut to build this. And what are you doing to sustain those trees? For every tree that you cut down, how many have you built? So that there is a supply for the future. If the area is denuded with trees, with trees, or in our case, elephant grass, which is used for thatching, what happens to the material that you need to construct this vernacular architecture? I think the two need to be together. Not only are you teaching the community that they need to have a sustainable supply of wood or whatever it is, whatever material that they're using to build these incredible buildings, I must admit. Because if you cut down, because I remember, sorry, I'm also from Africa. I remember when I was younger, you could barely see the neighbor's house. Now you can see 10 miles down the road and you're thinking, what's happened to the trees? What's happened to the bushes, the hedges? It's all very good to have these great ideas, but what about looking at sustaining the local material? And also the other thing is you'll need water to work on whatever buildings that you're constructing. The deeper down you dig and you use the water from the water table, the less water is available for everyday use. And that is something that is becoming more prominent these days with climate change. So vernacular architecture has to work with sustainability. For every building that you build and whatever material that you use, you need to have so many trees built. You have to look at alternative sources of water. You have to look at, rain, probably using rain as a source of collecting water, because you can't always trust what's deep underground. So it's great to design buildings that work for the environment, but also look at the materials that you need to construct those buildings. That's just my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. No, I think your point is absolutely vital to this conversation, because there is no vernacular without an understanding of the ecology from which the buildings come out and from which the built environment comes out. So some of the longest traditions which have lasted around the vernacular fully understand what the renewable resource is and how to continue to renew it. So if you are building a building, you already plant the wood, the tree, which will give you the wood in 30 years' time when it needs refurbishing or replacing, and so on. So I absolutely, and thank you very much for mentioning the point about water, because that's often forgotten. And so many places, things cannot be scaled up or built enough because of a severe lack of water. And that's not just an issue in Africa or Asia. We also have a lot of housing being planned in the UK for which there's no water, not sufficient water. So I think that's a very important point you've made. So the knowledge of ecology and the behaviors around that, really important.
I remember one conversation that I had in Douala with one people that we met of the community, and I explained them that I come from south of Italy in a very arid area, and there is an issue about water there. So every house has a tank under the house because we don't have water every hour, so every day. So when we have water, we collect water under the house. And this is an important part of the house. So I remember my grandfather built our family house. The first thing that he did was create a tank to collect water for the house. So when I remember the discussion, I was so surprised for them to say, oh, really, there is this kind of issue in South Italy? Yes. And we manage in this way. This comes from vernacular. My hometown is very close to a city that is called Matera. There is a system, urban system of water collection under the city, under the caves of the city. And it's, remember me, the system of water that comes from Iran, no? The water collection, urban water collection system. So this is another point from vernacular, no? What we learn from vernacular. Or we can manage with water issue, for example. So maybe we have also to think not just because the climate is changing, so probably we have to watch. Now, in the past was just South Italy with the issue of water, maybe it's now all Italy with this kind of issue, so we have to watch other kind of system, vernacular system from other part of the geographic part of the world. Other question? Yeah.
Sorry, I've got the microphone here.
Thank you. Thank you for your talk. So I'm planning to write my dissertation and focus on vernacular architecture in Morocco. And this is maybe more of an advice than a question. What resources do you think I should look at? Or, because you just mentioned now that vernacular is also in Italy and it has happened in your town. So are there any resources that would help me eventually to look at? Because, for example, I didn't know that this was a thing also in Italy, and that was very interesting. Maybe a little guidance on how do you think I should manage this so it's not a repetitive thing of maybe what you've done or maybe other students have done before me.
My personal suggestion, let's start from something that you like it. There's something from your culture or other culture that you like it, go in depth of this. So the first period of your dissertation, just have a look. I can suggest you some books to watch. I can give you there are some resources online so you can have. Watching stuff, go through the books. Not just online pictures, go through the books, see pictures, see drawings, see the works of some words, some names of architects you listen during your career. So take your time to watching stuff and then starting from something that you like. Okay, this is very interesting, let's start from here. So this is my very poor suggestion for you. So let's start for something that you like it. So this is my suggestion. There's a big literature about vernacular, so I think it's a difficult topic to manage. So another suggestion for me is what is interesting from my point of view is the environmental aspect. Maybe it's not your interest, so it depends on your interest, but for me, environmental aspect, materiality. There's many, many topics that you can develop. But my full suggestion is just start from something that you like it.
I just want to stress something about the word synthetic vernacular, because I think this is a key point. That probably you would find something interesting which is not strictly related to architecture, but more on cultural anthropology or computer science. There are many, many interesting research, investigation on pre-colonial culture, on learning from, and I mentioned before Ron English, which is teaching ethnomathematics at the University of Michigan, is developing this very interesting research on African fractals and the computing culture which is behind different, I would say, manufacturing and architectural artifacts in sub-Saharan Africa. So a way to analyze these within a sort of a more mathematical approach and try to reconstruct the rules to eventually evolve not just the aesthetic of these, but the behavior of these, the performative aspects of these. Because once you understand the rules, the set of rules in between the geometry, the materiality, the cultural and the climatic aspects, then you really understand how potentially you could take ownership of this and customize this and adapt this to a contemporary scenario. So what I'm trying to say is that probably we need to look to other disciplines as well. And this is what I learned from anthropologists and computer scientists. The fact that vernacular culture and formal culture is dealing with complexity much more than our, let's say, advanced culture. And the fact that there is a world of mathematical models which are, again, implicit behind this, that we need to understand. We need to understand the cause-effect relation, because these are emergent systems, and people are not repeating the same things for ages just because of the aesthetics. They are repeating because it's working, it's responding to some specific for example, climatic, extreme climatic conditions. So again, I think we need to develop a more transdisciplinary agenda, which is connecting architecture with, again, computer science and cultural anthropology.
There's a question at the back.
So I was just going to add to that. I think what's quite important is if you could. Sorry, I beg your pardon. I was just answering this.
So what might be the difference between, let's say, a Western architect capturing vernacular and ChatGPT capturing language?
Very good.
Sorry, they missed the question. Yeah.
Reflect on a structure of thought where we might say, so a trained designers trained to design, might be in some sense simulating or reflecting on a vernacular building system, or engaging with an indigenous building system and abstracting from that a systematic way of going about design. What might be the difference between that and AI models simulating language, by which I mean ChatGPT?
From my point of view, the main difference is probably the knowledge, no? To make something that comes from vernacular, probably you have to understand something, no? You have to understand how this kind of traditional architectural works, which kind of logic is behind, which kind of criteria is behind the design, of behind the topics that are around this building. Using the AI and ChatGPT doesn't need to have this kind of background, no? So I think the approach is completely different. It probably cannot compare. You want to? Yeah, please.
Right, okay, so that was a bad question. No, I'm going to leave it at that.
I just want to respond to the earlier question here, if you don't mind. So I think it's a very good question you asked. You know, where do you start when you're looking at it in a small piece of research? Where do you start? Well, actually, you have a very good book to start with. That you can go to the author who's right here as well. And beyond that, and I think I just want to pick up on a point that Giulio made earlier about, you know, we are living in a world where climate is changing. Lots of other things are changing. Our behaviors are changing. Our lifestyles are changing, evolving very fast. So perhaps one way to look at it is how the role of the vernacular in Morocco is shifting with respect to water, because climate is all about too much or too little water, and how it is shifting in terms of materials, the point that the lady brought out earlier, and how it is shifting in terms of another factor, which is our lifestyle. We need new types of buildings now than we had in the past, where vernacular. So you could identify, because you're doing a small piece of research, you could take one or more of those. In terms of there are 2 or 3 names which, when you look at vernacular literature, which will come up again and again. Hassan Fatih is one from Egypt, who is kind of not so close, but close enough to Morocco, who did a lot of work with Nubians, which Paolo showed in his images. Even if you don't go into a lot of depth, it is very good for inspiration. And then if you really want to see an architect who's committed his entire life communicating very simply but very effectively how to communicate vernacular, the use of vernacular architecture in contemporary use. There's an architect called Laurie Baker, which you can find on the web very easily. A lot of his books are simply hand sketches with some descriptions next to it. And if you want to go to the other end of the scale, then there is an encyclopedia of world vernacular architecture, where very difficult to find copies now, by Dr. Paul Oliver, who was also a blues specialist. So you might want to look at that, if you can find a copy, that is. So lots and lots to look into. I think you won't be short of material.
Yeah, no, I mean, to get along with the Paul Oliver, there's the Radowski books as well, Bernard Radowski.
Yes, thank you, Bill. Thank you very much for mentioning that, absolutely.
And they were kind of weird characters, both of them, because they spent their life traveling around the world looking at Bernard Radowski, yeah. The prodigious builders.
Sorry, just want to, on that point, also want to mention that you must go and have a look into Will's laboratory on building materials. That is up in the lab, isn't it?
M503A.
M503.
It's a cupboard, yeah.
It's a treasure trove.
Look, I don't. You've been there. We've all been talking for a long time, so I think we should say thank you to you all, and thank you to Paolo and Maddalena. Thank you. Thank you to Ripin, Urna, Alice, and Giulio. Thank you for your contributions. And yeah, I'm just going to suggest that I just wonder. It's a question. You do not have to answer this, but could you take your approach, the approach of the book, and could you apply it anywhere? Could you apply it to the UK or something? You say, and look at vernacular construction, or Italy, or France, or anywhere which the vernacular is local. I mean, that's what it means. But could you run your same lab program in a different context. And I think that's because in terms of appreciating local knowledge, learning from the locals, which in a way is what you seem to be all be getting at. And so, that's open question. But Urna, you wanted to say something?
No, that's a really good point, Will. But I just kind of wanted to add something that I thought of from your question. Sorry, about the resources for vernacular architecture. I was just thinking about the kind of challenges of vernacular architecture being celebrated, and it's really related to the resources. And actually, vernacular architecture and the practice of vernacular architecture is very expensive because the resources that you use are really valuable. Wood, water, local materials, which are organic and pure and good for the earth and take a long time to be created naturally. And then that's when high tech starts to win, because you can make really cheap building materials using oil and fossil fuels and so, which can be really accessible. So I was just wanted to add that is one of the kind of challenges to vernacular architecture being practiced and sustained in the way that it probably should be. So thinking of ways of how to use water and plant trees and kind of that economy is quite hard to maintain, or the balance is really hard. Going back to the Mongolian example, like Mongolian yurts were made of skins and timber and hides, which were really grand and amazing, but actually they were really, really, really expensive. And when they became under the Soviet rule, the Russians were like, this is actually really unsustainable for us economically. So they kind of created this cheaper alternative that they could mass produce during the industrialization. And that's kind of what we're left with. So I just thought that was an interesting perspective.
Sorry, I was just going to add to your point there about vernacular, Will. I think it's actually a good question. As you said, I don't know how much time we have, but it's a good rhetorical question, and I think you can actually apply that here, because if you look at some of the making programs that are around on television now, that's in effect what they're doing. You know, I think is it like the repair shop that's like starting to look back and say, well, these are all crafts. And I think there's scope for that here as well. And tying with what you said, it's about getting that balance, because we have the modern technology here, we have the advances, we have the money potentially to evolve and develop, but we're actually harping back now here to traditional ways of doing stuff, because, you know, the industry is suffering. You know, where have all the brickies gone? Where have all these people gone? So I think there is an element of it that can be applied locally here. So I think vernacular architecture is a global thing in its context, in the right context. But I don't know if you want to wrap up the evening, but I think...
No, I just want to thank everyone for coming. But thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.